Queen Isabel of Spain was not only the greatest woman ruler in history, but very likely the morally best and most just woman ruler in history. She took a country at the edge of chaos and anarchy, plundered by robber barons, ravaged by civil war, profoundly depressed economically, and made it the greatest power on earth. And she did this by no harsh, domineering rule, but by bringing justice and peace, integrity and incorruptibility, care and honor with her wherever she went. Above all, she brought love, the love she bore her people and the love they bore for her. By her marriage to Fernando, and the love that sealed it and the unity and harmony of both of them in the action she crafted, she not only unified Spain, but performed superlatively the combined duties of queen, wife, and mother that often seem incompatible. In the 10-year struggle to complete the centuries-long reconquest of Spain from the infidel invader, the Muslims called Moors, Isabel was ever constant. The total victory that was won would never have been achieved without her. She marshaled the troops, sent the food, and brought up the guns. When morale faltered, she came in person to the battlefront, to the camps outside the besieged cities, to inspire her soldiers. And she inspired them as no warrior queen but St. Joan of Arc has ever done. When a lone and penniless sea rover from Genoa came to her with a plan and a dream so unique, so otherworldly, that few others, and none in positions of authority, had been able to follow it even in imagination, Isabel brought it to reality. Her patronage of Columbus was directly and essentially responsible for the greatest geographic discovery in history, for the opening of a new world, and eventually for the baptism and conversion of hundreds of millions of souls who had never heard of Jesus Christ before the Admiral Isabel sent across the unknown seas reached them. That the beginning of their conversion was unnecessarily delayed was not Isabel's fault. She made every possible effort to launch and facilitate their conversion and to protect the Native Americans, to whom she always felt a responsibility equal to the responsibility she felt for her own people of Castile. 3 days before she died, her last public act featured a charge for the protection of those Native Americans. Some of her last thoughts on earth were for them. The year that Columbus returned triumphantly from the voyage on which he discovered America, Isabel began the great reform of the church in Spain. She was the first to launch it, 2 years before she found and elevated its clerical leader, Archbishop Cisneros, to the primacy of the Spanish church, using all her personal and political influence on the Borgia Pope to induce him to install in this office a man so very different from him. Cisneros deserves great credit for the thoroughness and lasting effects of the reform, which required a priest and a bishop to fulfill it. But that reform was Isabel's in conception, formulated and first put into practice while Cisneros was still living in a hermit's hut. It is no exaggeration to say that this reform, which Isabel began and Cisneros completed, saved the Catholic Church, not only in Spain, but in Europe. For without the Catholic strength and unity of Spain, it would have been almost impossible to preserve the Church elsewhere. Protestantism would have triumphed, then divided and subdivided as its nature dictates. All unity in Christendom would have been lost. Well-instructed Catholics know that the Church cannot be destroyed, but it has no guarantee of survival in any particular part of the world. Isabel's reform, running straight against the tide of Renaissance manners and morals, changed history fundamentally. She might well have called it her supreme achievement, if her humility had permitted her to recognize it as such. During the last 7 years of her reign, Isabel bore crosses and endured sufferings that most men and women have hardly imagined, let alone endured. She saw ahead the shadow of destruction by death and madness of all that she and Fernando had built. But she never lost her confidence in God and died at peace with him. In his good time, her work was confirmed, and her grandson did what her children had been unable to do. As part of Isabel's essential task of unifying Spain and bringing it justice and peace and good order, she founded the Spanish Inquisition. The black legend that later grew up about the Spanish Inquisition has brought much unjustified reproach upon her for that action. In fact, the Inquisition, as she established it, was very much needed in Spain. Despite occasional abuses, some severe, it remained for centuries the most popular and most trusted tribunal in Spain, sparing the country the horrors of religious civil war and revolution, and much private revenge and calumny based on ethnic prejudice. Some of the methods it used and the punishments it inflicted are rightly criticized, but none were unique to the Spanish Inquisition. They were common to judicial proceedings in all countries during that age, as much in those which later became Protestant as in those which remained Catholic. Isabel's expulsion of all the Jews from Spain in 1492 was an unjust act, though not without some considerable reason and provocation. But in a fallen world, no one, not even a saint, who rules for 30 years is just in every official action. No more than any man or woman, however holy, who lives nearly that long fails to commit some sin. There was so much justice associated with every aspect of Isabel's life and rule that the balance tips overwhelmingly in her favor. It is our misfortune, not hers, for she is beyond misfortune now. If the special sensitivity every just man must have to this particular issue in our murderous century causes us to give this judgmental and moral lapse of hers more weight than it is due. There can be no possible question that from the very earliest notices we have of her, in her girlhood until her last hour of life, Isabel the Catholic lived a life of prayer. Again and again, especially at critical moments in her life, though never failing even in the rare times of tranquility, we hear of her devotion to prayer, her assiduity in prayer, the length of time she spent in converse with God. She lived the commandments. She loved God with all her heart, with all her soul, and with all her mind. She forgave those who had wronged her. Again and again we see her doing so, especially in the early years of her reign when dealing with the fractious nobility. When she let justice take its course without the alleviation of public mercy, it was only because she was convinced that her primary duty to secure the realm required her then to wield the sword God gives to every legitimate government. She loved her people, the poor, the suffering captives of the Canary Islands and of the Indies. She did not envy nor covet. One may search all her writings and actions in vain for examples of petty jealousy or spite toward anyone with whom she ever had to deal. She honored her father and her mother, though they had left her a princess alone among designing predatory men. She loved her husband and children with a profound, almost consuming love. In the family circle, she was a dutiful wife, submissive to her husband, seeing no contradiction in that with her public place as his full equal, Queen of Castile beside King of Aragon. No more chaste ruler ever graced a throne. No more chaste woman ever sat by a fireside with her husband and children. No breath of scandal ever touched her personal life, though she lived at court in Renaissance Europe, where scandal was rampant, expected, assumed, where even the Pope had illegitimate children.